Good evening, good evening. Thank you very much for coming to Nerd Night number 4. This time we are collaborating with Hack Fukuoka. It's Hack Fukuoka, right? That's right. Okay, that's right. I always mistake it for like Fukuoka Hack because I'm a Fukuoka Hack. Okay, all right, that joke did not go over too well. I'll just kill myself right now. All right, my name is Raymond Terhune. I am one of the organizers for Nerd Night Kyushu, along with Lori Griffiths here, we'll be talking about the Engineer Cafe itself. I'd like to first thank Engineer Cafe for hosting tonight's evening, and James from the Dancing Penguin bringing in some great beers. If you haven't exchanged your ticket already, there's a couple more left over there, so please do that. But, the rule is we don't have any kind of connection with the bar across the hall, so the tickets are only good for the beers that Nerd Night has bought today. If you want to get okawari, go get it over at cash next door. So, general rule. Today we'll have 3 speakers. They'll each speak about 20 minutes, I hope, and then followed by a 10-minute Q&A. And then we'll probably have about a 5-minute break in between them, and then we'll just go on to the next one. And then at the end of we'll just mingle around a little bit, and if anybody has some follow-up questions for anybody. So let me first go by explaining what Nerd Night is. Okay, Okay, well, welcome to Nerd Night Kyushu. What is Nerd Night? What is Nerd Night Kyushu? This is a place where people come together to share a drink and listen to nerdy talks. I get a lot of questions on like, what is nerd in Japanese? And it's like, nado, otaku, right? But it's like, but the connotation's a little bit different, right? I think but somebody, somebody coined a really nice term for nerd night in Japanese is otaku no yube. So it's an evening of nerds almost. So we're going with that for now. But if you've gone to a science cafe, you've gone to a TED talk, probably you've had this kind of experience. You sit down, you listen to some really interesting talks. We're not as retentive as TED, and we're not as classy as science cafes because you get to drink if you want to. Nerd Night itself actually started in the United States, specifically in Boston and New York. And now today, there are Nerd Nights in over 100 cities across the globe. There's actually 4 in Japan if you include Kyushu. In fact, today, just this evening, right now, Tokyo is having their Nerd Night as well. They're probably the biggest one. Of course, there's a lot more people involved over there. But yes, there's Kansai, there's Kyushu, and then there's one down in Okinawa. Okay, so what topics are covered in Nerd Night? Basically, anything nerdy under the sun. If you're into it and you have a passion, you want to talk about it, come on down. We don't have a lot of rules. Just don't be an asshole. and it has to be welcoming to people who drink. Today, we're here, September 30th, at the Fukuoka Engineer Cafe. Very great venue. This is beautiful. Usually, we have it at the Dancing Penguin down at Takeshita, where James is over there is working. Both absolutely excellent, great places. Definitely recommend checking out Dancing Penguin sometime if you're down south of Hakata. We have one today. We try to do this once every couple of months. Our next time, we're trying sometimes in December. If you are interested in speaking in December or sometime early next year, come talk to us. Pitch us a talk. If it sounds interesting, we usually don't say no, but if you're here, this is the perfect example of the kind of audience you'll be talking to. Nihongo mo daijoubu desu. Yeah, so if you're interested, please contact us, kyushu@nerdnight.com or the website. We have a Line group now. You can join our Line group. Ask anybody, like repeaters here. They're mostly in the Line group. They'll add you on if you want to. Okay, and then with that, I'll hand it over to Lori to, there you go, to talk about Engineer Cafe.
It's got to fix the cameras. Hey. So yeah, we're here from the Engineer Cafe. So I'm the community manager here. Who is here for the first time today? Also, like maybe half or a bit more. That's pretty good. I think a lot of people have walked past this building, but not gone inside. So if you don't know, the Engineer Cafe is a free community space, co-working space, hacker space, maker space, where you can come and study programming, study software, hardware, making things, and everything in between. We're fully supported by Fukuoka City, so there's no cost to use any of this. It's all free, all the hardware is free, the makerspace is free. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that stuff, please come along. And we're open 9 till 10 every day, even weekends. So yeah, we also have a bunch of events. Oh, this is the makerspace downstairs. There's a little 3D printer. We've got another one of those as well. There's our laser cutter. We also have this guy, which is a CNC machine, which will cut out blocks of wood and metal and using for making parts. And also, yeah, if you want to run events just like this one, big, small, or anything in between, please come talk to me. We have events for programming languages, new technology, obscure frameworks and libraries, anything like that. And all the equipment you see us using today, like mics, cameras, you can use it all as well. Anyone know what this is? I just saw this a few days ago and was really excited. You seen one of these? Huh? It's not LiDAR mapping. It's a 360-degree projector. That's this room. So coming up, it's October the 14th. We're going to do a bit of a demo of this guy. It's pretty fancy and pretty rare. Yeah, a few other events coming up. We've got Web VR, building apps in Unity. Those are both in English. The panoramic projector you just saw, that's going to be on the 14th. And if you want to find out about more events, more things going on, yeah, please check out the Engineer Cafe website or the Engineer Cafe Compass page for all the events coming up. Brilliant. So that is my intro for Engineer Cafe. So let's move on quickly to our first speaker. Ray? Yep.
Okay. So you want to come up here and then set up while I introduce you? Okay, there we go. Plug that in. Should be. Yeah, okay, here, go ahead. Set that up somewhere where you can, is there an extra chair or table we can set up? Thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah, let's see, I think it's on the right side. There you go. There you go. Oops. Yep, and I just, let me just.
Oh, did not mean to do that.
Oh, that's right, too close to the other one. Oh, you're all good?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So.
I'm good. Okay.
We're all good. Okay.
Yep.
Well, allow me to introduce our first speaker, Stephen Lyman, a honestly true Renaissance man, if you ask my opinion. His presentation, absolutely incredible. Title being Debutantes, Arson, Booze, and Adrenaline: The Improbable Life of a Samurai Scientist. Take it away.
Thank you very much. If nobody minds, I'm going to do this without a mask. I think it'll be easier to hear me, especially since it's being recorded for YouTube. So thank you all very much for coming out. It's my pleasure to be here. And this talk allows me to combine many of my loves. I am a trained clinical epidemiologist. I studied history in university. Obviously, I love Japan, and I also drink. So this allows me to combine all of my interests, although not really epidemiology. I apologize for the shameless plug, but I don't apologize because I always forget to introduce myself after the talk. So I am Stephen Lyman, as was mentioned. I am the author of the Complete Guide to Japanese Drinks, which you can see right here. It's, well, $19.95 US on Amazon. They did have copies still on Amazon Japan. I don't know if there are any left, but they can get more. I'm also the co-host of the Japan Distilled podcast, available wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And that's all about Japanese alcohol. So I would like to introduce you to Jokichi Takamine. How many of you have heard, before you got the invite for Nerd Night, how many of you had heard of Jokichi Takamine? Without having heard of him from me. Okay, one person here had heard of Jokichi Takamine. Now, I'm not going to bury the lead, but I also don't want to ruin the punchline. This man, in my opinion, is the most important Japanese person to ever live in the United States. And none of you have heard of him. Why? Let's talk about that. So he's born in 1854. We're in Japan. What else happened in 1854? Commodore Perry sailed the black ships into Edo Bay and opened Japan at gunpoint. That would have significant influence on Jokichi Takamine's life because he was born the son of a samurai physician, and his mother came from a sake-making family. He was born in what is today Toyama Prefecture. His father, fortunately, because he was a physician as well as a samurai, when the samurai class was abandoned, he was able to make a living for the family. Jokichi was the eldest of 13 children. They had big families back then. By all accounts, he was a very, very bright young man, very promising, and he was, so I have a very abbreviated slideshow here, so I'm going to go back. So at the age of 10, his father studied Rengaku, which was Western learning or Dutch learning. So Jokichi was sent to Nagasaki, to Dejima, and he actually lived with a Portuguese family, English, and to study Rengaku at the age of 10. At the age of 13, he was sent to Kyoto and Osaka, first to military training, and then to Osaka High School, which very quickly became university. He was a brilliant young man, started studying medicine at the age of 13. He ended up abandoning medical school because he fell in love with chemistry. And we are in the Engineer Cafe, so here's why I can mention engineering. He was a member of the first graduating class of the Tokyo University School of Engineering. However, his degree was actually in applied chemistry. As with most Japanese men who went to college at this time, went to university, he ended up working for the government. This was during the Meiji Restoration. His father had lost his samurai class status, but he could still work as a physician. Other samurais were out of a job. Obviously, huge upheaval as Japan modernized in the 1800s. So he joined the Department of Agriculture, and he was actually sent to the 1884 World's Fair as part of the Japanese delegation for the Department of Agriculture. And this would have a profound effect on his life. While here, he was inspired to actually start Asia's first phosphate company. He actually ended up importing phosphate to the United States from Japan to make his first fortune. His inspiration for doing that was that he fell in love. Now, he was considered royalty in all of the press that he received in New Orleans at this time, even though his father had lost his status. And at a debutante ball, he met and fell in love with this young woman who was 18 years old at the time, named Caroline Hitch. He wanted to marry her, but he was not a man of means, so he went back and he started that phosphate company to make a fortune and ended up convincing her to marry this Japanese chemist. She moved with him to Tokyo. Now, he was a very, I don't know how romantic we can say he was. On their honeymoon, they traveled to the United States and he studied patent law and agricultural fertilizer. So that's how he spent his honeymoon. I guess it fits right into the group that we have here tonight. They did move to Tokyo. By all accounts, Caroline was not happy in Tokyo. Her mother visited, did not stay. Her mother didn't like it very much either. So now, they were productive while in Tokyo, yes?
Sorry, who's the other woman?
So the mother is in the dark kimono, and Caroline is in the light kimono. So now they were productive in more than one way. He actually was appointed the head of the Japanese patent office at this time. He was 31 years old, and he was running the Japanese patent office. Remember, he studied patent law on his honeymoon. This would also be a very important turning point in his life. Another way they were productive is they had 2 children, Jokichi Jr. and Ebenezer, names of the time, I would say. Now, he was a relentless innovator. He was always experimenting. So his mother-in-law sent a telegram and said, you need to move to Chicago. You need to start a company. So he started the Takamine Ferment Company in Chicago, Illinois in 1890 when the family moved to Chicago. His first product was actually called Takadiastes. This is a 19th century roll aids or Tums. This is a digestive aid, and it uses koji. How many of you have heard of koji? All right, a few more people than have heard of Dr. Takamine. So koji is Japan's national mold. All right, we take our mold very seriously in Japan. And koji, when put onto an appropriate substrate, will convert starches to sugars, and it will also convert proteins to fatty acids, which is vitally important for alcohol production. And we're getting to why that's important here. But the other thing it can do is it can break down things that are making you uncomfortable. And so he created Takadiastes, which was a digestive aid that was his first patent in the United States. His second patent was actually to use koji to make alcohol in the United States. He patented that, all right? That's been done in Japan for 1,300 years at the time that he patented it. But because he had studied patent law, and because his mother was from a sake brewing family, he understood how to saccharify grains using koji to make alcohol. And this led him to be introduced to the Illinois Whiskey Trust. The Illinois Whiskey Trust was the largest producer of alcohol in America in the late 19th century. They were producing 80% of distilled spirits across 65 distilleries. He patented the use of koji to make alcohol. He licensed that to the Illinois Whiskey Trust. They began experiments in 1891 to make whiskey using koji. So a koji whiskey. Now, there was a headline in the Chicago Tribune, September 24th, 1891. Whiskey to become cheaper. This maltless whiskey process, using the Takamine process, they were actually naming it after him, was going to make whiskey cheaper. It was going to actually make whiskey more affordable to produce and for consumers. 2 weeks later, there was a mysterious fire at the distillery where they were doing the experiments. Nobody ever figured out what happened. An accelerant was used. Dr. Takamine escaped to the basement with his life. He ended up surviving the fire. Now, fortunately, the Illinois Whiskey Trust had deep pockets, so they were able to rebuild the distillery. And in 1894, they began production of, so I don't have a picture for it, they began production of Koji whiskey in Peoria, Illinois, December 1st, 1891. What else happened in 1894? What else happened in 1894? This nobody will know. Have you heard the name Masataka Taketsuru? He went to Scotland, he learned how to make whiskey, he stole the secrets, he came back to Japan, he built the Yamazaki distillery, he had a falling out with Suntory, he went and he opened Nikka. He's legitimately considered the father of Japanese whiskey. He was born the year that Jokichi Takamine started making whiskey in America. So the first Japanese person to ever make whiskey, legitimate whiskey, was doing it in Illinois in the 1890s. Now, the story doesn't end well, at least this part of his life. In February 1895, so I'm not going to ask anybody about American legislative history, but the Sherman Act was passed in 1890. This is the antitrust legislation which was used to break up monopolies. Teddy Roosevelt loved the Sherman Act. He used it. He was a trust buster, right? That was his whole thing. It was used once in the 19th century. In the first decade it existed, it was used once to break up the Illinois Whiskey Trust. So in 1895, February 1895, the Manhattan distillery was shuttered and sold at auction to another distilling interest, and the new owners reverted to malt whiskey. They stopped making Koji whiskey 3 months after they started production. Dr. Takamine sued to get his patent back, but you can imagine a Japanese immigrant suing in federal court in Chicago, Illinois in the 19th century. It did not end well. He lost his case because that patent was considered an asset for the new owners when they bought the distillery. He ended up having some severe health problems, probably due to stress, and he ended up abandoning his lawsuit, and he moved his family to New York City in 1897. Now, again, constantly innovating. He put whiskey behind him. He decided to try his hand at something else. He opened a laboratory in Harlem, in Manhattan. And in 1900, he isolated adrenaline. This was the first isolate of a human hormone in human history. It was done by a Japanese immigrant in Harlem in the year 1900. He licensed this to the Park Davis Company, who he'd also licensed his Takadiastase to, and he made an absolute fortune. The other thing that he had been busy with after the failed whiskey experiments is he started a pharmaceutical company in Japan, which today is the second largest pharmaceutical company in the country. And his family are still shareholders. I believe it's called Daiichi Sankyo. Is that right? I think so. Now, adrenaline has saved millions of lives. We have the first isolate of a human hormone in human history and a medical innovation that ended up revolutionizing treatments for various medical problems. He should have won the Nobel Prize. But again, you have a Japanese immigrant living in New York at the beginning of the 20th century. He was completely ignored by his peers. But he didn't take that sitting down. He was not allowed into any of the gentlemen's clubs in New York City. At this time, all of the wealthy businessmen had these private clubs where they smoked cigars and drank scotch and had big fancy meals, and they made business deals. And he was not allowed in these places. So he opened his own. He started the first private gentlemen's club in America for Japanese businessmen. It's called the Nippon Club, and it still exists today. In 1905, there was a World's Fair. Remember, he met his wife at the 1884 World's Fair in New Orleans. In 1905, there was a World's Fair in St. Louis. The Japanese government, for the Japan Pavilion, built a replica of one of the emperor's summer palaces, and it was named Shofuden. It was part of the Japan Pavilion. It was an exact replica of a summer palace, traditional Japanese craftsmanship for all of the carpentry. They built it in Japan, shipped it over, rebuilt it in St. Louis. When the World's Fair ended, the emperor gave it to Jokichi Takamine as a gift. He tore it down again, put it on a train, shipped it to upstate New York, and rebuilt it in the Catskills in what's called the Marrowald Club, which is a private club for wealthy families from New York City that's been around since the 1870s. How could this Japanese guy become a member of the Marrowald Club? His wife's sister was married to the founder. So he was able to rebuild Shofuden in Marrowald Club in Forestburg, New York. This was built in 1905 in New York. This photo is from this summer. It's still there. I had the opportunity to go visit when I was back. It's not in good condition. It's being renovated, but the Shofuden still exists. And this picture does not do it justice. It's actually a huge structure. It was originally on a 100-acre estate. Unfortunately, due to some things we'll talk about in a few minutes, his family in the United States fell in some hard times, so they ended up selling off Shofuden and the surrounding land, but Shofuden still exists. And finally, now he ended up getting the Order of the Rising Sun award from the Japanese emperor, basically knighthood. He was recognized by the Japanese Academy of Sciences. He's well recognized in Japan as a very important figure in medicine and in science, not so much outside of Japan. But he never lost his faith in American-Japanese relations, which at this time in the early 20th century, I think was quite important, so much so that he ended up donating the cherry blossom trees to Washington, D.C. And this is why I think every American, and maybe everyone, should understand who he was, because this is for visitors to Washington, D.C., this is a huge part of the experience, are those cherry blossom trees that are still there today. He also donated the trees at New York City, around Columbia University, Grant's Tomb, Riverside Park, other places around New York were cherry trees that he had donated. Dr. Takamine ended up passing at the age of 67. He was still quite young, but he had lived with liver and kidney problems for most of his life. Ended up dying in 1922 at the age of 67. He's buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. He never left New York. Now, Caroline was younger. She was about a decade younger than him. She remarried. She married a rancher in Arizona. But when she died, she was buried with him in the mausoleum in Woodlawn Cemetery, but it has Caroline Takamine and then the surname of the guy that she married afterward. But at least she went back to him. You remember Jokichi Jr. and Ebenezer? Ebenezer wisely decided to go by Eben. They ended up taking over the Takamine Ferment Company, which had been moved to New Jersey, and running the business for a while. Jokichi Jr., I don't have a picture of him as an adult, but he was a very, very handsome young man. And he had two problems: women and booze. At the age of 42, he took a header out of a hotel window in Manhattan and died. Mysterious circumstances, but he did check into that hotel room with a woman who was not his wife. So that created a scandal for the family. They ended up having to sell most of their assets to recover from that scandal. Eben ended up running the business in the wake of his brother's death. Now, another thing about this family is there was not birthright citizenship in the United States at that time. Jokichi Jr. and Ebenezer were not American citizens. In fact, when they married American women, they'd virtually never lived in Japan. But when they married American women, those American women had to give up their citizenship. This is the time before World War II. It's a very, very difficult time for immigrants in the United States. But at the age of 67, the age at which his father died, Eben received his American citizenship. So that did end well. Jokichi Jr. did have a child before he died. He was actually 42 when he died. His son, Jokichi III, ended up going to Williams College and becoming a world-renowned addiction expert, which makes a lot of sense since his father died of alcoholism. And he was actually at UCLA in Los Angeles for a long time and ended up having an obituary in the LA Times. He also had a child. Her name is Deborah. She married, last name Moyer. Deborah Moyer is still alive. She lives on the Oregon coast. And I was able to visit her this summer and hear much more about this family. And it was a true honor to meet one of his relatives who's still living in the United States. But that's basically our story of Jokichi Takamine, who I consider the most the most important Japanese person to live in the United States in the last couple centuries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes of Q&A, so I think we have a lot of questions going on. So please, the floor is open.
Okay. Is anybody making Koji whiskey now?
Great question. So full disclosure, I am an ambassador for Honkaku Spirits. It's an import company in the United States that has actually revived the Takamine Koji whiskey for sale in the US under the Takamine brand. We actually received permission from his estate here in Japan to use his name on a commercial product. So Koji whiskey has been revived, but it's made in Japan, not in the States, although there are now American craft distillers who are experimenting with Koji to see if they can revive it. This story was essentially lost to history until a student at, I believe, Kent State University wrote a doctoral dissertation about him and uncovered this whiskey story. So it's not long that we've known this part of his history.
Is it still patented?
Oh no, the patent is expired. Yeah.
What's your best favorite Japanese drink?
My favorite?
Yeah.
Kusu Awamori. My favorite Japanese drink is long-aged awamori from Okinawa. They're aged in ceramic pots. After decades, they start to taste like caramel, but they're distilled spirits with no sugar. They're absolutely gorgeous. Yes?
If nobody's asking questions. The original adrenaline that was it synthesized? Was it isolated?
He isolated it, and
he
they
isolated.
later.
Okay.
Yep, and they later. Park Davis worked out how to make a synthetic.
Yeah, because
version of it.
I think I remember like the late 19th century was a huge boon on trying to like isolate or synthesize this like mysterious hormone on this. So it's the first time I've heard of his name at least on this. It's incredible.
Yeah, there was some controversy about who did this, and also, all of these great men of science, I think they didn't do it by themselves. They're not sitting in a laboratory on their own doing these experiments. He had a team. And apparently it was one of the junior scientists on his team that actually was successful in doing this, but he did it in Dr. Takamine's laboratory, being paid by Dr. Takamine to do the work. So the big guy gets the credit.
What was it, like another American, or was it another Japanese chemist in his lab?
Don't recall, unfortunately.
I'm interested, like the composition of like races in his lab in that sense. Like,
yeah, I was able to acquire a copy of his original English language biography, which was published in 1928. It's out of print, obviously, but I have a copy of it. I just haven't read it since I've been back. But yes, the Take diastates did very, very well. The adrenaline did very, very well. His whiskey actually never went to market. The whiskey was being whiskey has to be barrel aged before it's sold. So in 3 months, they had made some, put it in barrels, but the new owners might not even understood what was in those barrels and probably just blended it into other products. But there was never like a Koji Whiskey released into American liquor stores.
Yes. I'm sorry if I got several questions to ask. The first one was his Koji Whiskey legal in the United States? Because from those kind of bourbon laws, you got to be new barrels, 51% of corn, whatever. So was using Koji that makes it a legal whiskey?
All of the rules around bourbon production were actually passed by Congress in like the 1960s. So this predated all of that. And actually, you can still make whiskey in America in any way you want to, as long as it's made from grain and distilled and aged in oak for at least 3 years. Those are the rules for American whiskey. So this still qualifies as whiskey in the United States. You just can't call it bourbon. Unless it's made with corn. Now, he was actually making his whiskey with corn. The Revival brand does not use corn because, personally, I think malt whiskey fans would agree, corn is an inferior grain for whiskey production.
Koji can still break down corn.
It can, yeah. There are actually corn shochu. So shochu is the traditional distilled spirit here in Japan that uses koji for the fermentation process, and there are corn shochu. That's certainly possible. He was actually growing his koji on a blend of cerealized oats and wheat, and then using that inoculate in the fermentation with corn. Now, that would not taste good, to tell you the truth. Remember, he was trying to make whiskey cheaper. He was not trying to make whiskey better. Right? That's the unromantic part of his story.
Well, another question, perhaps the second part of the question that I ask is that what do you think, personally, what do you think, those kind of the efforts trying to make intoxicating beverages cheaper? It's a way to intoxicate more people or let more people enjoy the thing. But then again, if it goes cheaper, it's just a natural tendency, it's going to taste worse. What do you think of this?
So I studied U.S. entrepreneurial history in college. So my supposition is that the cost savings, were going to only go to the Illinois Whiskey Trust. It wasn't actually going to become cheaper for the consumer. They were just going to be able to make it cheaper and sell it for the same price. So they were going to increase their margins. But that's the incentive. The incentive is always to make things cheaper. I mean, we're in Japan. I don't know how many of you realize this, but Japanese are extremely, extremely price sensitive for alcohol. There's a reason why happoshu is more popular than malt beer, because it's cheaper. There's a reason why canned chuhais are cheaper, are more popular than craft beer. It's cheaper, right? And let's not even get into the absurd pricing for shochu in this country, because it's incredible and it's so affordable. You should definitely be spending more for your shochu.
James, you have a question?
I did, didn't I?
You did.
You can't escape.
What's my question?
It's pretty early on in the talk.
Yeah, right. It's been a long day. You'll have to get back to me.
No worries.
For maybe one or two more questions? Okay, we'll do.
In United States, do you have to remember his name to get high scores in exams in schools?
No. He's virtually unknown in the US. It's really incredible. When I tell this story to people, they've never heard of him. They're just really surprised. So I think you learn about him in school here in Japan, right? Cherry blossom trees and adrenaline, most likely, but not the whiskey story, not other parts of his life.
So after the other company took over the distillery in Chicago, why do you think they stopped trying to make the Koji whiskey if it was going to be cheaper?
Yeah, great question. I glossed over that, and that's part of the problem with improvising with a few slides. The maltsters were pretty powerful, and it was all run by the mob. So, yeah, it's Chicago, right? So it was actually Peoria, Illinois, but the mob ran the state. So it was definitely a financial decision and not wanting to have kneecaps broken decision. So.
Maybe one more quick question. Okay,
Yeah.
The nuance is that it was sabotage on the facility.
There was an accelerant used. It was arson. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And
they
is there
suspect-
any evidence to say who performed that sabotage? Or
Illinois 19th century mob. But there's no evidence because nobody would talk. Right? Anyone who was willing to talk was no longer with us.
so you're saying it was the Irish then?
Most likely. Well, the maltsters would have been probably from either England, Ireland, Scotland. I think the Germans, because of malt beer, there are a lot of German distillers actually. Yeah. So that's probably who made up the maltsters union. I don't know who was breaking kneecaps at the time.
All right. Well, everybody, please give another round of applause to Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are going to take about a 5-minute break. It's 7:40 right now. We'll be back here at 7:45 for our second speaker, Billy Dalton. There it is, right there. Yeah. So if people who still have their drink tickets can still exchange for a beer. If not, if you're looking for okawari or looking for your first drink and don't have a drink ticket, the bar is open.
Please make your way to your seats.
Everybody sit the fuck down. All right, everybody, please have a seat. We're going to start off with our second talk. Everybody's all limbered up, got some interesting talks going. They're all good with this? Okay. All right. So, I hope everybody had a really great short break. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Billy Doughton. Doughton? Oh, go ahead, please clap. With talking all sorts about computers and the real world with his presentation title, Less is More, How to Help Computers Efficiently Understand the Real World. Take it away.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Billy. I'm from the Humanophilic Systems Laboratory at Kyushu University. I've got the unenviable task of following that incredibly interesting presentation about Japanese whiskey. So I'll do my best. So first, what do we mean when we talk about computers in the real world? Well, computers, as you know, can do lots of things. You know, they can do calculations, send emails, even play games. But in this case, I'm talking about the capacity to process, leverage, or modify real-world information. So, for example, if you have images, you can use Photoshop and edit them. If it's video, you can use Final Cut, which is another computer program. Or audio, you can use Logic Pro. These are all ways that you can modify real-world information with your computer. The problem, though, is now we just have too much data. And this can be seen if we look at the sort of files that are being used, right? So now with image, we have TIFF, which is 6 times bigger than JPEG, 4K video, which is a whopping 18 times bigger than standard HD, there is such a thing, and high-res audio, which is 10 times bigger than MP3. So the file sizes are getting huge. And there's an environmental and financial cost involved with all of this data. If we're storing them on data centers, well, a single data center consumes the same amount of electricity as 50,000 homes. So, you know, especially these days with the price of electricity, I can let you imagine quite how expensive that is. But the upshot is that it limits access to certain technologies. If you can't afford to access the data, if you can't, you know, access a data center, then you can't use these technologies. And this is particularly a problem in the field of AI or machine learning. So what I mean by that is machine learning is when we use data to make decisions or predictions about the real world. And so that's what I mean when I say understand the real world, right? Use data and then use it to decide things. In current AI-related research, there's a humongous focus on performance, which is great because that's what gives us our technologies that work, anything cutting edge, but it requires a colossal amount of data. To give you an idea, the prediction is that in 2025, the data associated with all of this will be in the order of 100 zettabytes. That's a lot of data. So what needs to be done? Well, my approach is I wanted to optimally acquire this real-world information. And what I mean by that is that I want to reduce the amount of data that we acquire when we, you know, take it from the real world, and thus the data that we store and the data that we use. And I want to use the information that we obtain in this way, in particular in machine learning applications. Hence the name, help computers efficiently understand the real world. So this is what real world information looks like, believe it or not. This is our efficient approach, and this is our computer understanding the world efficiently. When we talk about information, very often what we're talking about are signals, right? And when we talk about real-world signals, they have certain properties, but the most important one is that they're continuous, which means that for any time on this interval here, there will be a value. And for any value between the minimum and the maximum value, you know, it can take any possible value between those two. It's completely continuous. There's no discrete steps. For the rest, then, of this presentation, I'm going to use an analogy I want to think of signals as boxes. Both contain information, and the characteristic of your box and of your signal, well, they're both defined by the contents, right? So if you've got a box full of toys, that's a toy box. And if you've got, a signal coming out your electric guitar, well, that's an electric guitar signal. Often, though, we're not actually interested in the box. We're much more interested in the contents of the box. And so if we think about this a bit more technical, and I'll try not to get too technical, we can represent our previous signal in the frequency domain. So instead of looking at it as a function of time, we're looking at it as a function of frequency. And we can think of this as the signal's contents. But in fact, it's just a different way to represent the information that's contained inside the signal. It highlights different signal properties. How does this information then get into the computer? Well, it's a process called analog to digital conversion. How do we get the box into the computer? If we start with the analog input signal that we had a look at previously, we can assign at discrete time intervals, so here we say every second, a discrete amplitude value. So it's quite easy to see that, for example, here, that's very easy to assign this. But at this point, we need to decide, where do we assign it? So we assign it to number 7. And what we're doing here is that we're discretizing the analog signal. And this is what we're left with. This is what the computer sees. A set of individual sort of timestamps with information, and each level has been replaced by ones and zeros, which is something a computer is very comfortable with. The number of samples required to make sure that our signal can be properly represented in the computer is determined by something called the Nyquist rates. And very simply what it says is the number of samples is directly related to the highest frequency in the signal. Therefore, it's directly related to the size of the box. The bigger the box, the more samples you need to represent it accurately. If we do so, then we get a faithful representation in the computer. However, it's very important to note that not all of the information is necessary, right? If we have a box full of toys, we don't actually want every toy. We only want a small selection of them. So the first question that we had to solve was, is it possible to obtain only the relevant information that we want using fewer samples? We'll get back to that in a second. I want to talk about the second problem. The second concept is something called filtering, and filtering is used to remove unwanted information from the signal. You don't really need to know anything about the signal, you just need to know what you don't want. So here I've decided I just don't like cars. I don't like playing with cars. So whatever's in this toy box, I don't care, just don't give me a car. Fine. I was a very spoilt child. This is what it looks like from the technical point of view then. This is the signal that we saw before. This is its frequency domain representation. We decided that we don't want any of this. It's gone. We've just done low-pass filtering. And if we bring it back to the computer, how does the computer modify this signal? Well, once it has it, it does something called digital filtering. And here we go. We have our filtered signal. So we have the original box minus the car that we don't want. The problem with this approach is that it's completely inefficient. We're sampling data, and then we're removing the data that we don't want. And that doesn't make sense. It's a complete waste of resources. What we really want to do is that we want to sample and filter at the same time, like these two gentlemen here are doing. So the answer to both of these questions, the way that we solve both of these problems, is by proposing a new approach. And this new approach has two following goals. It's got two problems that it needs to solve. It needs to reduce the samples that we need to get the information that we want, and we want to filter and sample at the same time. So how do we do that? We first need to explain a property of signals, and I promise this is as complicated as it's going to get. After this, it should be much less technical. There is a type of signal called a sparse signal, and these signals contain relatively little information. Many signals fall into this category, but in box speak, we can think about it as a big box with nothing in it, right? So this box only has 2 toys compared to the one previously that had 5, but the box is actually the same size. If our signal is of this nature, and many are, then we can use this as an opportunity to efficiently obtain the information. How do we do it? We shake the box. We shake the box really, really, really hard until all the toy parts break apart. And so when you finally open your box full of broken toys and you put your hand in it and you pull out a handful, well, you know what's in the box. You'll get the arm from the doll, the wheel from the car, half a trumpet. You won't get everything, but you will get information about everything. And all it took you was one handful. Effectively, we've reduced the number of samples. The second great thing about this approach is that the way that we shake the box actually influences the toy parts that you get. So if you imagine we have a car in our box, well, if we shake it side to side, maybe the car will roll to one side of the box, and when you open it, you only get car parts. So effectively, you've filtered as you sampled. If you only want the doll, well, shake it in a different direction. That way, you only get the doll. But if you don't care, just shake the box in every direction. You won't get any filtering, but you will reduce the amount of samples needed. The final thing I want to get over quickly before going on to a quick case study is, when we talk about machine learning, one of the main things that it does is something called classification. And so it's a key part of machine learning, and effectively you use the characteristics of a signal to determine the nature of the signal. So how long is it? What's its period? What's its amplitude? In box speak, by seeing what's inside the box, can we figure out where it came from? So in this case, this box came from the toy shop. The characteristics that we use to determine where the box comes from occur post-sampling. But in our approach, we are reducing the amount of samples and we're removing unwanted information. And doing that makes this whole classification process much more efficient. So in the whole classification process, this is where the improvement in efficiency occurs. Now all of that is out of the way, I think it might be quite interesting to have a look at a case study, how we use this approach in the real world. The application that I looked at is acoustic vehicle detection and identification. So as the name suggests, it's using microphones to detect and identify vehicles based on their sounds. It's useful because it's a cheap and effective way of improving road safety. You don't need to do any road works or anything like that. You just plop a couple of microphones down and you can get going. So the installation costs are low, but the actual analysis and leveraging of the data is quite costly computationally. So is it possible to use our proposed approach to make these systems more efficient? And this is what we investigated in our research. The first step is, what kind of signals are we looking at? So in this case, we're looking at cars. Can we identify this vehicle as a car? As a scooter, or are no vehicles passing at this particular point in time? And we got these signals in 3 different weather conditions: when it was clear, when it was raining, and when it was windy. I know you can't see the wind on the picture, but I promise you it was windy. So this is looks a lot more complicated than it is. Effectively, it's just the same frequency representation thing that we saw earlier, just for the average vehicle signals. So this is what the frequency distribution, for example, of the average car looks like, of the average scooter looks like, and for the average period of time with no vehicles. Everything to the left here, 3 kilohertz, we don't want that. That's background noise. We want to keep everything here, that's on the right here of this pivot point. So when we talk about filtering in this case, what we mean is that we want to remove this and keep this. So how do we check that this approach is actually useful? I mean, is it worth doing? Well, the best way to do that is to check it by comparing it to an existing method. So what we're checking is shaking our box better than just systematically taking every toy out of the toy box? Our new approach, we'll see, uses 16 times fewer samples than the existing approach. That's great, but to really check if it's a valid approach, we need to check 2 things. First, we need to check the accuracy of the system. By accuracy, we mean what's the proportion of correct versus incorrect predictions. So how often does it call a car a car? The second thing is the runtime. That's the length of time that the system takes to produce predictions. So if our system takes a year but is more precise, well, that's not really helpful, right? We want our system to do it quickly. So first we have a look at the accuracy results. Simply put, this says how good is our new system at doing its job. And it's pretty good at doing its job. In all weather conditions, it gets 80% of the predictions correct. As expected, it does better in clear conditions and not quite as well in adverse weather conditions. We can compare it to the previous approach. So the previous approach was only tested in clear conditions. So if we compare like for like, we can see that they're pretty close. I mean, the new approach is a bit less accurate, but it does use 16 times less samples, which is a pretty good trade-off. So we can say that the new system is good at its job. The second set of results that we're interested in are the runtime results. So in this case, the runtime is a measure of system efficiency. We run the 2 systems on identical hardware, and we time the process. And we can see that our new system is faster at every stage of the process. And so we can sort of say that our 16-fold reduction in the number of samples has directly led to an approximately 3 times faster runtime, which is pretty good. So our new system is more efficient. So in conclusion, we saw really that in the case study, our new approach got similar accuracy to previously existing systems, and it did so at a significantly reduced computational cost. It concretely illustrated then how this box shaking approach can be used to improve the efficiency of classification systems. And therefore, to tie it back into the title of the presentation, we showed that it was possible to help computers understand the world more efficiently. That's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, you can email me here. This is my laboratory, if you are interested in any of this research. And finally, the case study and a lot of the background theory is covered in this publication here. I believe it's open access, so you should just be able to Google this. But if you email me, and if you can't find it, if you email me, I'm more than happy to share it with any of you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Billy. Oh, that's a great talk. Okay, floor is open for questions. All right? Okay, all right, so we'll go you, and then.
So in the system you described filtering out before a pivot point.
Yes.
Is that does your system figure out what the pivot point is by itself, or is that something that you have to manually configure for each different application?
That's correct. I need to change that depending on the application.
So you're simply sampling at a 16 times slower rate, or
Yes.
are you adjusting the sampling speed dynamically? That's on average 16 times less samples? Or how
No, it's not dynamic. It's 16 is how we determined it heuristically, effectively. I checked a couple of different sampling rates, and 16 was the best balance between performance and accuracy, effectively.
So the A to D sampler is simply taking samples at 1/16th the rate of the previous approach.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So this is for audio.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question, Fred.
Is that for audio?
Have
you tried this on images and 3D data?
Yes, so in this case it was with audio. I also did it with smartwatch sensor readings. And it can be done with any signal that's considered, well, sparse, but it doesn't have to be that strict. You can use this approach.
So text and things like that as well?
I'm sorry, Mike.
Text and things like that as well?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I probably don't need this, but can you go back? Oh, sorry. Can you go back to the slide that had the 3 weather conditions?
Yes.
And sorry, I just want to take a look. Yeah, that one. Oh, sorry, the next one with the graph. That one. Okay. Kilohertz.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not from the world of kilohertz. Can you?
Sorry, a kilohertz is 1,000 hertz. And
Okay.
1 hertz is 1 sample per second. So that's 48,000 samples per second. So if you have, say you start singing, and there's a microphone that will pick up your voice, what's happening is that 1 second, 48,000 times, the computer is going to sample what you said. It's going to, at that given time, it's going to give it a value, which will be converted into ones and zeros, and then that can get converted into digital information. And the higher that number, the more faithful the representation is.
Imagine trying to draw a picture of the fine tip pen versus a big fat pen.
Yeah.
The small pen will give you more accurate.
It's like pixels for an image, right? The more pixels, the higher resolution your image.
So sorry, just a follow-up question. Can you go back to the weather one? So those were the 3 conditions that were tested, correct?
Yes, I was trying to get these 3 types of category, and I made sure to get them in different weather conditions.
I see. Like those specific conditions?
I guess the idea was to show that the system was robust.
Okay.
That it wasn't, I hadn't cherry-picked sounds that I got in a nice clear day.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Some sort of control on it. It was interesting that I guess the windy conditions had a lower success rate because there's more sound to wind. Is that?
So my theory is that, in fact, the rain was quite good, and I think because rain is constant and consistent, it's quite easy to filter out.
Mm-hmm.
Wind isn't. So if you've got, say, 100 samples of cars taken in clear and rain, if you're knocking this out, well, some of the rain sound is actually part of this, so you're knocking out the rain sounds. So it's not really too much of a problem. But the wind sound, I mean, it's very unpredictable. It could come here, it could come there.
The inconsistency.
Exactly.
I see.
That's
Okay.
much harder to filter out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
Hi.
Hi.
So you're talking about filtering. Is there 2 kinds of, and reducing the number of samples?
Yes.
They're 2 separate concepts, right?
Yes.
So the red stuff on this slide, background noise, that's filtering.
Yes.
And reducing the samples is taking fewer points, right? That's
Correct.
okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
No, no.
Just clarifying.
No,
So the efficiency is caused by fewer samples, not the filtering.
that's correct. I think it's correct to say that the accuracy is really a function of the filtering, and the runtime is a factor of the sampling.
So in terms of that particular case study, are you detecting the presence of any cars or any scooters at all, or are you detecting sort of traffic levels?
The former, yes.
You started out your talk saying that we're spending enormous amount of energy on storing enormous amounts of data.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how that compares to data storage in the biological world that came about by evolution. So in every cell of every organism we have DNA storing lots and lots of data, and also in the brains of all the animals there's lots of data being stored and processed. And presumably there's a energy cost per megabyte, and there is also space cost per megabyte. Do you have any idea how that compares to the energy cost and the space cost per megabyte in these data centers that are storing all our JPEGs?
No, I'm afraid I don't. Sorry.
Because the world is full of information storage even before computers, and I'm wondering how we're doing.
Right.
In terms of that.
But I mean, it's an interesting point. If the idea is that our brains maybe are more effective at storing data, and I guess what I'm trying to think is that, like, hopefully with this approach, it can be another more effective way to store data. I didn't touch on it too much, but in fact, too many slides. Here, you can, in fact, it's possible to reconstruct the original toys from the bits of toys if you use mathematical algorithms, which I use and not really understand. But, and so, in fact, you can think of this as a form of compression. If you of lossless compression, if you're sampling the data this way, you can store it in this manner. And if one day you decide that you want to reconstruct it later on, you can. You just need to apply a certain algorithm to it. And in that way, you're shifting the computational burden further down the chain, if that makes sense.
Okay, I want to give a simple question. Can you show up what is that? The frequency power graph, like of the each vehicle? Yeah. You said like the red part is the background noise.
Yes.
How did you define it?
By listening to it. No, and also if you in some of the previous research as well, it's quite clear that all of this you can, if you can get rid of it, you should get rid of it.
Probably time for one more question. Like, so I do have one. This is more beyond what we talked about today, but you do work in the humanophilic lab.
Yes.
Right? And so it's I take it your work and your colleagues' work is all about trying to simulate the real world experience into computers, trying to make computers understand the real world. So today we talked about auditory stuff. Like, what sort of conditions, what sort of work is going into like other parts of like sensory parts?
In my lab?
Well, or in the field itself, or just
otherwise
I
would say you can just ask my boss. He can tell you what's going on. Well, in fact, so for example, I know that he's looking at Wi-Fi sensing. So we already have Wi-Fi. If I get this wrong, I'm sorry, but we already have Wi-Fi everywhere. We use it to connect to the internet. We can also use it for sensing applications. Well, that's great because we don't have to build anything new. Like, we're piggybacking off already existing infrastructure. What else is done in the lab? It's embarrassing, I don't know. There's stuff about like wearables as well, right? Like you're doing wearable related stuff, is that correct? So what
shopping.
Shopping.
Yes, there's also research about shopping.
Oh, like yeah. Do you wanna maybe you can?
You got about a minute and a half.
Okay. So there's a lot of things relative to what humans doing. Sometimes like when you are inside a meeting, and what kind of facial expression are you doing, or like some sounds, or maybe. And we are also doing like when people are shopping, and we are using a camera to record the people, the customer, like what kind of item that they are looking for, that sort of research. Yeah. And there's some examples. Yes.
I think you should have done the talk instead of me.
Well, no, okay. Leave your email address with us, please. We'll get in touch with you. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Billy. Please give a round of applause for the speaker. Well, thank you very much. Okay, so we are going to take another 5-minute break to set up. It is 8:17, so okay, a little bit past, quite a few minutes past 20. So as we said, the bar is still open. I think the last story is 9 p.m., right, Larry? Okay, so we'll still have a little bit of time, but you might want to get a drink if you're still having one. There's still 3 more beers, and I still have tickets 3, 11, and 14 unaccounted for. So if you haven't gotten a... You've been saving your ticket. Okay, there's one. All right. And then after, we'll be back with Satoshi Tanaka.
1, 2.
Okay. Can we get everybody seated, please? Hey, listen up, everybody. All right. So, we're good? Okay, all right. Oh, God, what a great evening we've been having. Great series of talks. Man, I've been talking to so many interesting people today. I haven't had a second drink, so got to do this while Satoshi sets up. Okay. Satoshi, are we doing okay? Hi. Yes. Okay. So, well, okay, no story time. Okay, all right. So, for our third and final talk of the evening, we have Satoshi Tanaka of, you work here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I stuck in engineer cafe.
Yeah. So
I like this.
Big honcho here at the Engineer Cafe, talking about a very interesting. I don't know how these connect, so I'm interested in hearing what this is going to be about. About a map otaku learn from honeybees. All right, take it away.
I'm so nervous. I'm Satoshi. I'm staffing Engineer Cafe, Community Manager っていうのやってます。I love maps. 地図めっちゃ好きです。I studied insect, bug, honeybee. I love Ruby, Go, JavaScript. この辺のプログラミング言語がめっちゃ好きです。Caution. めっちゃ昆虫出てきます。苦手な人は気をつけてね。 Yeah. So I explain in Japanese. まあ日本語で喋るんで、ちょっとね、英語のスライド見たい人はここのスライド QR コードをね、見てもらったら嬉しいな。いやー、みんな地図使ってますか？ Do you use maps? Yeah. Google マップとか、あとは最近だと人気なのがストラバ。バイスクルね。やってる？みんなやってる？やってる。マップがあったりとか、ローリーも使ってるよね。あとポケモンね。ポケモン GO ね。めっちゃ流行ってるよね。ポケモンとか。いや、こっちが、Another Games in Niantic。ピクミンっていうゲームが最近流行ってます。いや、I love rent a bicycle too。で、僕全国で、いろんなレンタサイクルに乗ってます。東京の千代来っていうレンタサイクルとか、岡山の桃チャリ、桃太郎が有名なので桃チャリっていうレンタサイクルがあって、これめちゃくちゃ速かったんですよね。とてもアーリーアダプターでした。で、あとは、京都ピッパっていうサービスがある。ピッパは京都とか、東京とかいろんなところで展開してる。で、他に、出雲大社っていう大きい神社ね、シュラインがある、ところでは、出雲観光のレンタサイクルとか、あと伊勢っていう伊勢神宮大きいね神社があるところでは伊勢サイクルっていうような、自転車があって、まあ、いろんなところで僕はレンタバイサイクルに乗ってます。で、九州にもいっぱいあって、まあ、みんな乗ってるかな、チャリチャリ、ね福岡だったりとか、あと熊本で最近いっぱいポートができているので、すごいねプレイン平地ではよく使える、なんかよく展開されてるサービスで、佐賀、お隣の佐賀だとハローサイクリングっていうのがあって、これがめちゃくちゃ電動アシストなのでとても使いやすいです。で、みんななんか九州に来た人たちはやっぱ温泉とか観光とか、ホットスプリングめっちゃスパとかめっちゃ好きっていうので、湯布院とか阿蘇とかが有名なんだけど、湯布院とか阿蘇とかはこれクロスバイク、かっこいいねバイクが乗れたりとか、あとなんか阿蘇にもねよくなんていうのかな、ホステルとかに、よくバイクがね借りれるようになってます。っていうので九州も結構ね、長崎以外の、長崎はいっぱい坂がねあるから行けないけど、長崎以外だとこんな感じでいろんなレンタサイクルが乗れます。で、なんで僕が地図が好きか、きっかけはこんなストーリーです。僕はニューロサイエンス、あとはエソロジーとかニューロエソロジーとか研究してたんですけど、でコンピューターを使ってやってました。でなんか研究をしていく中で、コンピューターベースビジュアライゼーション、コンピューターを使った可視化がしたい、コンピューターでなんかとても自動処理がしたいよとか、なんかあとは地図と重ねて、ミツバチのハニビーね、ミツバチのその餌どうやって取られてるかっていうのを、可視化するっていうのが、当時のトレンドでしたと。で、僕は決めました。他のプロフェッサー教授だったりとか、あるいは福岡のコミュニティ、マップコミュニティがあったから、そういうところに聞きに行こうっていうふうに決めたわけです。ちなみに Honeybee use dance language、言語ねを持ってます。ダンスランゲージって何かっていうと、ノーベルプライズを取ったカール・フォン・フリッシュという人がいるんですね。1973ねあって、で彼はこの太陽と餌の位置ね、ディグリーをダンスにコンバートしてるんだっていうのを見つけた。彼らの脳の中でそのコンバートしてるのを周りの8ワーカーに伝えてる、コミュニケーションを取ってるというのを見つけたと。で、こう来てターンして、こう来てターンしてっていうのをワグリングをするのを、ダンスだよ、ダンスに見えるよねっていうので、ダンスってよく言われてます。で、実際にお見せします。こんな感じ、こんな感じ、ブーって言ってダンスしてブーってして、他のそのチームメイトも追っかけてコミュニケーションを取ってるっていうのが分かったと。でこういうのが結構オーソドックスに キャプチャーする、よくキャプチャーされています。今のはオプス、ごめんなさい。なんで僕らがセイヨウミツバチ、ハニビー、日本のミツバチじゃなくて、なんでセイヨウミツバチ、ヨーロピアンハニビーを使うかっていう話なんですけど、ヨーロピアンハニビーっていうのは、大体100年ぐらい前に日本に来たんですね。だけどそれからずっとなんかビーキーピングされてる、養蜂されてるんですね。でなんでされてるかっていうと、たくさんネクター、蜂蜜を取ってくれます、日本ミツバチよりも。で日本ミツバチ戦わないといけない、アグレッシブなんですよ。スズメバチ、ホーネットがいるからね。だからとっても穏やかなんですね。ジェントルです、ミツバチね。でよくセイヨウミツバチが使われます。で Only the European honeybee has that special dances。日本ミツバチには例えばダンスをしてコミュニケーションする能力とかないんです。セイヨウミツバチだけが持ってる特殊な能力なんですね。で彼らがこれはシュガーね砂糖水を飲んでいるところです。ちなみに幼虫ラーバは、ポーレン、花粉を食べます。プロテインとしていっぱい花粉を食べて彼らは大きくなっていくんですね。これが、他にセンシングをしてたライフロギングをしてた時のハチさんです。ゼッケンつけてるって言われて、日本だとね運動会とかよく言われるんですけど、ライフロギングしてるやつですね。で似た技術としてサイムテクノロジーとしてフェリカ、僕らが地下鉄乗る時にこうピッてやるようなああいうやつと同じような技術を使ってます。でこれが僕が研究の時に作ってた装置で、カメラがあってでここにハチさん、ビーハイブがあります。でここをそれぞれのカメラがこう撮ってると、こっちも撮ってると。でこれはコリドーで、こっちがアウトドアですね。これインドアですね。なので室内で蜂を飼う技術みたいなのを、装置を作ってた。こんな感じです。割とオーソドックスでどこの研究グループもやってるようなことです。だから僕らが特別にこれ作ってるってわけじゃなくて、みんなよくやってること。で僕はこういうコンピューターをいっぱい使ってこのカメラを動かしてました。ラズベリーパイ、Linux が動くし、あとは電子工作がしやすい GPIO ってピンがついてるね。エンジニアカフェにもいっぱいあるから遊んでもらえたら嬉しいんだけど、でパワーサプライが、スマートフォンと同じぐらいしかなくて大丈夫で、 Wi-Fi も使えるし Bluetooth も使える。マインクラフトも遊べます。で僕がどんな研究をしてたかっていうと、まずデコードした、データをこうプロットする、スキャッタープロットする。でこれがおそらく、フラワーパッチみたいな感じになってます。でこれをオーバーレイマップに、オーバーレイちょっと薄いね、オーバーレイして最後にカラライズのデンシティ、密度が高いところが色がついて見えるように可視化する、ビジュアライズするっていうようなことをやってました。で、ハニービーズは僕に地図を好きになるようなきっかけを与えてくれたんだっていうのが、一応前半のまとめです。で他にもアドワークス、僕の他の研究いろんなことをやってきました。でこれは天神です。天神のビルの屋上で養蜂してます。マイプロフェッサー、僕の先生ですね。で天神、なんで日本こんなこと流行ってるかっていうと、日本とてもね狭いからね、 US とかフランスとか、あとオーストラリアっていうのが蜜いっぱい取れるところなんだけど、それと比べてかなり狭いから、屋上で土地がないから屋上でやっちゃおうって言ってやるんですね。都会に蜜なんてないじゃんっていうかもしれないけど、結構ですねゴミ箱とかからもね蜜を集めてるらしい。でここら辺だとそこにアクロスっていうのがあって、アクロスでいっぱい植木とかがあるから、そこからいっぱい蜂蜜を取ってきてるっていうのが観測されてます。で銀座のその銀座蜂蜜っていうのも結構有名ですね。そうエクスペンシブ。であとは DNA シークエンシング、最近流行ってる PCR っていうのをやってました。例えば、これは、ポーレン とか、あとネクターから、花粉とか、あとは蜂蜜に含まれている DNA をどんな種類のが含まれているかな、どんな種の植物が含まれているかなっていうのを調べるっていうことをやってました。こういうのでもコンピューターの力がとっても役に立ちます。ちなみに名古屋大学で、名古屋大学と守ると1個あたりのサンプル165円とかでできるので、自分の唾液を取って送ると自分の DNA が全部見れます、配列が。っていうこともできます。はい、あとこんなのを作ってました。僕もちょっとコンピューターが好きだったので、ちょっとコンピューターで動くおもちゃをちょっと作ってみたいなっていうので、そういう研究グループに所属してました。動くかな。これはモスブレインですね。ガの脳みそです。こういうのを使って、これ 3JS っていう JavaScript のライブラリーで作ってるんだけど、こんな感じでぐるぐる動かしてもそんなに PC も熱くならないし、スマートフォンでも見れるようなアプリケーションを作ったりとかしてました。でこれをコレクションデータベースを作って、みんなに公開して研究に役に立ってくれたらいいなみたいな感じで遊んでました。よいしょ。でまだまだちょっと話は続くんですけど、で、僕はある日思いましたと。マップってウェブのデベロップメントとかで使えないのかなって思ったわけですね。Google マップとかもあるし、Apple マップとかもあるし、でもあとはなんか僕のお店ここにあるよとかいうシステムがあったりとか、あとはマッピングしてこことこことこことここにトイレがあるよみたいなシステムとかがあって、これ自分で作れるんじゃないかっていうふうに僕は思ったわけですね。でちょっとあれだな。で、いろんなタイプの地図が世の中にはあるわけですね。一つはビッグテックが管理している地図。これはGAFA、例えば Google マップだったりとか、あとは Apple が持っているマップだったりとかっていうタイプが一つ。でもう一つあるのはGovernment、政府が管理している地図。例えば日本だったら国土地理院っていう省庁があります。で、国土交通省っていうのがあるんですけど、そこの下の管理している地図とか、あとはアメリカとかフランスとかでも国が管理して誰でも使っていいよっていうようなマップがあって、こういうのもよく開かれてます。で最も開かれているものって何かっていうと、オープンソースソフトウェア OSS ってよく言います。OSS の地図が世の中にはあって、僕はこれをめちゃくちゃプッシュしてます。で概要がよいしょ。で例えばさっき言ったように、これがグローバルな地図、グローバルなサービスとしてこんなのが挙げられます。 Google マップとか Apple マップとか Foursquare とか Bing マップとか、最近だとS3 っていう、これはなんか結構プロフェッショナルユーズですね。 S3 っていう地図とか、あとは AWS マップとかあります。で僕が推しているのは一つはマップボックスって、ここもなんかとても最近だとちょっとねセンセーショナルだけど、ウクライナのエンパワーメントとかをしている組織になります。あとは日本も結構いろんな地図サービスがあって、マピオンっていうサービスだったり、マップファンっていうサービスだったり、あとはヤフーっていうサービスだったり、これは福岡の北九州小倉の会社なんだけど、ゼンリンっていう会社があります。これは結構日本でも有名ですね。ちなみにゼンリンショップって福岡にもあって僕のちょっと採用しなんで紹介するんですけど、こっちがいいかな。例えばこのクリアファイルだったりとか、あと日本っぽい手ぬぐいとかね、扇子とか T シャツとかマグカップとかタンブラーとかバッグとかいろいろありますし、で自分の好きなところをなんか自分の好きな風に地図を染めて持って帰るサービスとかもあるので、これ近くにあります。天神にあるのでぜひ遊びに行ってみてください。でもう一つゼンリンの大きい面白いところがあって、ゼンリンの紹介になってるね。 北九州は前林ミュージアムっていう大きいねミュージアムがあります。北九州のイベントだけど今ちょうどこういうなんか福岡特集、博多特集みたいなのをやってるので12月までやってるのでおすすめです。面白いと思います。1000円ぐらいで小倉城を見下ろせます。14階とかにあるので、はい、戻りまして、で例えばさっき言ったようなフリーマップ anyone and any use どんな用途でも使えるし、どんな基本的にはタダで使えるマップ、お金いらないよっていうマップとしてはさっきのガバメントマップで日本ではこの国土地理院っていうのがよく使われてます。ウェブサービスとかでも結構使われてます。でちょっと僕の推しなんですけど、これもエンジニアカフェで遊べるよっていう一つのなんか戻ってもごめんね。日本の山ねいっぱいあると思います。登山とかね好きな人いるかもしれないけど、日本の山のこの立体地図を国土地理院出してくれてて 3D プリンティングしましょうっていうイベントをやってて、エンジニアカフェでも何人か登った山を記念に残したいんだけどって言ってる人がいるのでおすすめです。あとパズルとかも自分で 3D プリンティングして作ってねとかね、なんかそんな教材とかもあるので、はい、みんなぜひエンジニアカフェに作りに来てください。で僕が今回一番推したいのが、そう私たちが作れる地図、誰でもそう見るだけ使うだけじゃなくてmake it 作れる地図を紹介したい。オープンストリートマップっていう地図です。これもどんな地図サービスかっていうと、アクセスする方が早くて、なんかオープンだしフリーだしちょっとあんまり出来が良くないんじゃないのっていう希望をある程度打ち崩してくれます。これがエンジニアカフェの近くの地図です。結構しっかりしてるよね。ちょっとエンジニアカフェ形ねおかしいかもしれない。ここがエンジニアカフェですね。これね、これがエンジニアカフェです。でここがなんかそこのホテルねっていう感じで作られてます。でちょっとここら辺の地図が古いので興味ある人は僕と一緒に地図を作り直しましょう。毎月そういうイベントやってるので後で紹介します。ここ貴賓館って言って、これもなんか結構歴史のある建物なんですけど、まだちょっとね古いままなんですよ。ここ工事が終わったので結構きれいになってるはずなんだけど道がまだないっていうね。これをみんなでね修正するっていう作業をしましょう。はい、で実際にそのエディターの画面とかを見せておくとどうやって僕らが修正しているのかっていうのが見やすいと思うんで、ちょっとデモンストレーションします。僕らがよく使うオープンストリートマップのエディターは JOSM っていうソフトウェアで Windows でも Mac でも動きます。OK。うん。いや。OK。例えばここどこかっていうと伊勢。この前ちょっと僕旅行に行ってきたんですけど、そこでなんかここ地図おかしいじゃんって言って見つけたところがあったので、そこを修正したっていう感じです。でスクエアじゃないな、囲ってダウンロードするとこんな感じでローデータが見れます。で例えばここって何って言ってポチって押すと ちょっと日本語でこれも日本語で申し訳ないんだけど、これビーチだよって属性が出てます。でこのビーチだよとかいう属性がポケモンとかピクミンとかに反映されて、なんか特殊なモンスターが出たりとか特殊なアイテムが手に入ったりとかっていう風な感じでこの属性は生かされてるわけですね。昔はそのナイアンティックはGoogle マップを使ってたんだけど、Google マップからもともと子会社なんですけど、ちょっとちゃんと料金払ってって言われたんでフリーで使える地図に逃げてきたっていう感じ。でもオープンストリートマップタダで使えるフリータイヤだけどサーバーはタダじゃないんですね。なのでちゃんとお金を払えて、オープンストリートマップの関係者とかはナイアンティックを攻撃してます。攻撃してますっていうか、そうちゃんとフラッグを立てろっていうふうに言われてるっていういきさつがあります。Google が金払ってるからいいじゃんってナイアンティックが言うけど、いやお前らも使ってるだろうと、よく言われるわけですね。でこれを例えばこうギューって持ってったら、なんか砂浜が本当はもうちょっと広いはずとかあったらギューって持ってってでこうでちゃんとやってこうアップロードすると、みんなの地図にも反映されるっていうような仕組みです。結構簡単にコミットできるよね。はい、っていう感じで、もう一つ紹介したいのがあって、オープンストリートマップは、オープンソースのマップサービス。おーマイデアです。時間じゃあここら辺で終わりましょうか。オープンソースの、ストリートビューもあるよっていう、感じです。のでぜひみんなも地図をね好きになってくれたら嬉しいな。はい。ジョテク天神っていうコミュニティやってます。エンジニアカフェにも遊びに来てね。はい。Thank you for listening. ありがとう。
Thank you very much. I didn't want to cut you off too early, but I think there's a lot of good questions coming in and talking about this. I just wanted to mention that you talked about Carl von Frisch, who won the Nobel Prize. Next week from Monday is when the next Nobel Prizes are announced. So from 6:30 p.m. October 3rd is the medicine and physiology prizes. So, check that out.
Okay,
we got questions.
Any question?
面白い発表ありがとうございます。
はい。
疑問点がいくつかあるんですけど、一つはアップデートするじゃないですか。常に変化してるじゃないですか、マップって。そうするとアップデートをどんなふうに考えればいいのかと。例えばナビだとアップデートしなかったら道に迷っちゃうということもあり得る。だからアップデートがどうなのかというのと、もう一つは最後の方に出てきたけどコピーライトの問題はそのオープンソースでクリアできるのかどうかって、その辺もう一回ちょっと教えてください。
はいはい。まずコピーライトの方からちょっと話をしますね。コピーライトは CC by SA っていう、これクリエイティブコモンライセンスっていうライセンスの中で、この SA4.0 っていうのは誰もが自由に使っていいし、で再公開してもいいし、それを共有しても大丈夫で、ちょっと改変しても大丈夫、現実的な範囲でっていうのが保証されているライセンスなので、このライセンスで、使われている限りは、基本的にどんな使い方をしてもいいで、それでお金を取ってもいいっていうのが明示されているコンテンツで、地図をこうやってコミットしてアップロードした時点でそれに同意したことになります。なのでみんながこの、クリエイティブコモンっていうのを大切に思ってるから成り立ってるってやつです。でそれを守れてない人はバンされます、っていう感じ。オープンソースっていうのがそういうムーブメントです。でなんかオープンソースなムーブメントいろんなのがあって、最近なんか僕らのそのトレンドで流行ってるのがプラトーっていうアプリケーションというかオープンデータで、日本がこんな感じでこういう感じで、これ渋谷なんですけど、こういう感じでデータをやってて、これもクリエイティブ、オープンストリートマップと同じく日本の、国がこう管理してるけど CC by SA で、 誰でも改変とかして使って商用で使ってもいいよっていうので、公開しているようなライセンスもあります。でこれは2つライセンスがあって国が管理しているものは、とは言っても、エンタープライズで使いたいっていう会社とかがあるからそういうところにはまだもう1個のライセンスを適用しますみたいな感じで結構複雑な感じで適用してます。あともう一つはその更新の話なんですけど、でこの更新してるやつは実はですね更新がない古いところとかは Web サービスの方で別の地図を使う別のサービスからデータを取ってきて差分を補強するみたいな Web サービスが結構多いです。なので OpenStreetMap っていうのをメインで使いながら Mapbox っていうまた別のサービスをミックスして使うみたいなことをやってるチームもあります。でいつ更新されたかっていうのは例えばこの履歴っていうところ日本語だとね履歴なんですけど見れて誰がいつどこを更新したかっていうのがこんな感じでエリアがね表示されるようになってます。どこら辺かなって言ってこれはなんか別のところ大きいなんか他のところなんだろうな非政府組織とかから提供されたデータを適用してるからこの範囲で大きい範囲で適用してるよとかいうのが書いてあるわけですね。っていうので誰がいつ更新したかとかの見えるので古いデータの更新とかはこれの更新履歴から弾いたりとかできるわけですね。っていうのでまあミックスして問題解決のためにミックスして使うっていうのがおおむねのウェブサービスとかカーナビとかの戦略になってるかなって思います。
はい。三橋の質問ですけど、どんな地図サービスでビジュアライゼーションしてるんですか？
さっきのこの地図サービスはこれかな。この地図サービスは、地理院地図って言って国土地理院の地図を使いました。フリーで使えるしライセンス問題も解決している。 Google マップとかを使うときはちゃんとお金を払わなきゃいけないですね。だからそれで研究でも使いやすいっていうので国土地理院だったりとかよくそのリサーチの現場でも国土地理院地図あるいは、ライセンスのようにそのオープンストリートマップっていうのが使われているわけです。でどんなアプリケーションでその可視化したかっていうのも実は補足であって僕はよく JavaScript だと Leaflet っていうライブラリを使って可視化とかしてます。あとは、最近だと JavaScript だと Deck.jl っていうのが流行ってたりとかするので Deck.jl とか使うときれいにヒートマップとかを作れたりとかするかな。であとは GIS っていうソフトウェアだと QGIS っていうのがよく使われてて研究でもフリーそれもオープンソースソフトウェアなので誰でもフリーで使えます。便利です。っていうのでビジュアライゼーションしてました。いいですかね。
Can people change the map to the wrong one if anyone can change it to like change a map on OpenStreetMap? Like 誰でも地図を編集できるんだったらこう間違った感じで編集されることってないんですかね？
めっちゃあります。
対策っていうか解決策とかはあるんですか？
あります。フォーラムとかがあるからそこでアラートが出るっていうのも一つあるしもう一つはなんだろうなデータのなんかこれクローラーっていうのが知っててそれこそ AI とかに近いんですけどこれは不正っぽいよっていうのが自動的にその AI に検出されたりとかいうのもちょっとずつ進みつつあります。でも基本的にはそれも込みでそのリスクも込みのオープンソースなのでみんなで良くしていこうっていうような思想です。いいですかね。なんかあんまり答えになってないかもしれないけど。はい。
One last question. You two need to do janken.
Oh my goodness.
8にIC チップみたいなものを載せて、飛ばしてマッピングしてたとこがありますよね。実は僕も大学で今昆虫の行動を研究しててあれやりたいなと思ってるんですけどIC カードでどうやってこの遠くの場所の8の情報を集めるんですか？
ですね、あれはちょっと見せ方が悪くってここにセンサーがあって帰ってきて中にいる時のライフログを取ってます。どこにいるかとかあとはいつ帰ってきたかと いつ出たか、だから僕らがタイムカードを出勤の時に切るのと同じような感じですね。あとは地下鉄乗る時と同じような感じで収集してます。で、外で取る仕組みとかもまああるんですけど、蜂とっても動きます。だいたい 5km とかを平気で行っちゃうから、そこにはなんかむしろさっきのビジュアライゼーションをもとにフィールドワークして、うちの蜂が来てるねとか、そういうのをなんかなんだろう、見に行ったりとかするっていう材料に使うっていうのが今回の僕の研究のメインストリームではありました。
じゃあ遠くに行ってる時に撮ってるんじゃなくて、それを覚えておいて帰ってきたのを記録している。
そうですそうです。っていう感じです。なので完全にその蜂さんここで撮影したものからデコードしてます。って感じかな。
ありがとうございます。
そう、遠くのやつとかはもっとビーコンとかが必要になるので、そういう技術も最近は、広まりつつあって、そういうのは結構もっと大型の昆虫では実用化されてます。クワガタとか。かな。はい。
Okay, thank you very much. Oh no, thank you very much. Everybody, give another round of applause to. All right, and with that, I'd like to bring our fourth Nerd Night Kyushu to a close. Thank you very much for our collaboration with Hack Fukuoka and with the Engineer Cafe. Like I said, we're always looking for new speakers, and all sorts of new people. We like to try to do maybe one more before the end of the year, hopefully at the Penguin if James allows us. And yeah, we will keep this place open until 9:30, say, for 30 more minutes. We got 2 more minutes until last door, so hopefully they're still around there so you can get a drink before that. And all right, thank you very much for coming.